Ganito yung magiging takbo ng ating session, no? For the next hour or so. Medyo heavy yung ating discussion. Okay, so the topics will be introduction to law, but it's more of a misnomer actually because I'm going to talk a very small part about the law lang, no? I'm going to give you an idea how to analyze a law using the substance, structure, culture way of analyzing it. Okay, we're also going to talk about anti-sexual harassment, pero pasadahan lang natin siya kasi i-discuss naman mamaya, gaya ng nabanggit ni Gio, yung ating policy against sexual harassment sa UP. And then we're going to talk about Safe Spaces Act. Actually, may dagdag ito, pero hindi natin yan kasama. So, to start, tungkol sa batas, what is law? Okay? Ang heavy ng tanong na yan. No? Basically, it's a set of rules that regulates or binds conduct. Its authority is derived from a perceived higher source. No? Also, basically, it is enforced by a designated authority and it may or may not contain penalty. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Kung iisipin nyo yung mga batas na meron tayo, may mga batas na merong kulong, meron ding fine lang in terms of monetary penalty, no? O meron lang basically na nagsasabi na ito dapat ang sundin kapag ganito ang activity. So practically, it just regulates conduct without imposing any penalty of imprisonment. So in essence, yan yung batas, and usually law is associated with justice, equality, and then equity. So maganda basically dapat ang batas, and it is perceived as objective, impartial, and neutral, also logical. So dapat kung iisipin natin yung batas, na may isip natin yung mga adjectives na ito, no? Na ang batas walang kilikilingan, no? Walang kinakampihan, it makes sense, okay? Hindi siya nonsensical, and dapat laging ang objective niya ay magbigay o makapagkamit ng katarungan or pagkakapantay-pantay. Pero, is this always true? Okay, yan yung pero na mahirap talagang sagutin. And of course, we know the answer to that. It's not always true. It's not always true that all laws advocate or advance justice, or basically not all laws are fair. At makikita natin with respect to the topic that we are having this afternoon, not all laws are gender sensitive. Some laws are basically discriminatory. Why? Because the people who are in power, who have the authority to make the laws, they have their own self-interests, no? They have their own ideologies. They have their own culture. They have their own set of beliefs. So yun yung sad part about it. And what you will see from the discussion later on is that law can be a double-edged sword. No? Pwede siyang makapagtaguyod ng maling kaisipan in the same way na maaari siyang gamitin para iwasto ang mga maling kaisipang ito. Okay, pero tignan natin, no, kung ano ba yung tatlong aspeto ng batas, at ang pinag-uusapan natin basically dito ay law as an institution. Ito yung substance. One. Ito yung gustong-gusto kong tinuturo na kapag i-analyze mo or i-assess mo yung isang batas, hindi mo lang titingnan yung substance niya, because meron din siyang structure dapat at meron din siyang culture. Attorney, ano po ba yung substance? Ito yung kung ano mismo yung nakasulat sa batas. So it refers to legislation, policies, legal practices, and rules and procedure rather. But are we only looking at what is stated in the law? No, we have to look at whether the law has a structure para gumana siya, no? Meron ba yung korte na mag-i-interpret kung merong disputes? Do you have enough enforcement agencies that will enforce the laws? How to administer it? So, meron ka bang pera para paganahin yan, no? And ano yung culture na namamayani sa isang community kung saan ini-enforce yung batas na yon? And if we talk about culture, we're talking about social context, beliefs, and attitudes. So, minsan nga, no, hindi mo nakakailanganin yung isang batas kung ang kultura ay maayos, basically. Why do you need to have a very specific law, for example, on sexual harassment, if a certain environment in which the law is going to operate is basically sexual harassment free? Or people just don't do it because ganun talaga sila, no? So, culturally, na-address na yung dapat i-address ng batas. Alright. And if I may say, yung ginagawa natin ngayong hapon, basically, is we're doing an activity that can help us improve our culture. Kumbaga, kung ano yung sinasabi sa batas, ang ginagawa natin ngayong hapon ay basically this is information dissemination, no? We're trying to learn new things. We're trying to talk about things na kailangan nating pag-usapan para maitaguyod natin ang pagkakapantay-pantay ng kasarian, for example. And that is basically working on the cultural aspect of the law. So tignan natin kung paano gumagana itong pag-a-analyze ng batas using the substance, structure, culture framework. May example akong papakita sa inyo at ito ay specific na batas na may bisa pa ngayon. Ito ang Article 247 ng Revised Penal Code, which refers to death or physical injuries inflicted under exceptional circumstances. Yes, yan po talaga yung title ng batas na yan. No? Mahaba siya. It's a crime. At ano ba ang krimen na ito? Sabi dito, any legally married person who, having surprised his spouse in the act of committing sexual intercourse with another person, shall kill any of them or both of them in the act or immediately thereafter, or shall inflict upon them any serious physical injury, shall suffer the penalty of destierro. So imagine niyo kung ano nangyayari dito. Merong mag-asawa, kasal sila, nahuli niya yung kanyang asawa, yung isa na nakikipagtalik sa iba. Okay? At sa kasamaang palad ay napatay niya yung asawa niya or yung katalik niya o silang dalawa. Ano daw ang parusa sa taong nakapatay na yon? Ang sabi sa batas na ito, destierro lamang. Attorney, ano ba yung destierro? Basically, it is banishment. No? Pipigilan ka lang na makita kung sino man yung nakapatay na yon, hindi siya maaaring makita sa isang lugar kung saan nangyari yung krimen within a certain radius of 25 kilometers to 250 kilometers. So, kumbaga, nilalayo siya doon sa scene of the crime. May kulong ba siya, attorney? Wala siyang kulong. Okay? Parang, ano bang klaseng batas yan? Yes, I hear you. At may karugtong ang batas na ito. Ang sabi dito ay, these rules shall be applicable under the same circumstances to parents with respect to their daughters under 18 years of age and their seducer while the daughters are living with their parents. So, sabi dito, kapag ang magulang napatay niya yung kanyang anak na babae, no, na below 18, ganun din, wala rin siyang parusa. No? Hindi rin siya makukulong. Banishment lang. Parang yung ginawa kay Dr. Jose Rizal, pinatapon lamang siya sa dapitan, hindi nga ganun kalayo, no? 25 kilometers lang, hindi lang siya makakalapit doon sa scene of the crime, pero malaya siya, walang kulong. Pero ang tanong, what if the victim happened to be a son? So, what then is the crime committed? Okay? So, ano nga ba? Kasi daughters lang naman na nakasulat dyan. Wala namang nakasabi dyan na children. Di naman children ang ginamit ng batas. Basically, if it is a son who was killed by the mother or the father because the son was caught having sexual intercourse and that son is below 18 years of age, the crime committed is not under Article 247 of the Revised Penal Code, but a crime of parricide. At makukulong ba yung magulang? Yes. Maraming taong pagkakakulong. No? So therefore, bakit ganun, attorney? And this is an example of substance of the law that carries a double standard. Dahil lang ba babae yung biktima dun sa isa, hindi makukulong yung nanay o yung tatay, pero kung ang kanyang napatay ay anak na lalaki, makukulong siya ng maraming taon. So, makita mo yung double standard of morality. Okay? So, ayan, no? And this is still a good law. Ibig sabihin, may bisa pa rin siya hanggang ngayon. Okay. And another example is basically also found in the Revised Penal Code in the crimes of adultery and concubinage. Baka alam nyo na rin ito, no? Article 333 pala and 334 of the Revised Penal Code. It's basically the same, but not the same also, no? Ang gulo mo naman, attorney. Ibig sabihin lang, the same in a sense that we're talking about sexual infidelity. The wife committed sexual infidelity against the husband, and that crime is called adultery. The husband committed sexual infidelity against the wife, and that crime is called concubinage. But in the law, adultery is defined as committed by any married woman who shall have sexual intercourse with a man not her husband. Yan lang yung kailangan mong patunayan, and then you can easily get a guilty verdict against the wife for the crime of adultery. Ngayon, if the wife is the one who is going to file a case against the husband for the crime of concubinage, the wife needs to prove any of the following. One, that the husband keeps a mistress in the conjugal dwelling, or the husband shall have sexual intercourse under scandalous circumstances, or shall cohabit with her in any other place. So ang tanong, alin ang mas mahirap patunayan? Yung concubinage or yung adultery? Basically, yung concubinage. Kasi mas mahirap patunayan na, well, basically, yung husband committed sexual intercourse under scandalous circumstances. Samantalang dito sa kabila, simpleng sexual intercourse lang. Dito sa kabila, papatunayan mo pa na binahay niya yung kanyang mistress, etc. And pagdating sa parusa, ganun din. Sa adultery, maximum of 6 years. Dito sa concubinage, maximum of 2 years. Diba? Yung minimum doon sa kabila, maximum dito sa concubinage. Mahirap na nga patunayan, pag napatunayan mo pa, mas mababa pa ang parusa. So again, we're talking about double standard of morality. The only difference is that the one is committed by the woman, the other is committed by a man. So, yan yung example ng substance na hindi maganda, no? Unfair sa mga kababaihan. So, let's look at the structure naman. I don't know if any or all of you have heard of this law, RA 8505. Ang tawag sa batas na ito ay Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act. Meron po pala tayong batas na nagbibigay ng ayuda at proteksyon sa mga biktima ng panggagahasa. Okay? Sabi sa batas na ito, dapat mayroong Rape Crisis Center. Ano dapat ang makukuha ng mga biktima sa Rape Crisis Center? Psychological counseling, medical and health services, pati medico-legal examination. Pero marami na po kaming karanasan na ang mga biktima ng panggagahasa halos walang mapuntahan, hindi makakuha ng libreng counseling. Kahit nga medico-legal examination, mahirap ma-access. Okay? Sabi ng batas na ito, kailangan ding tulungan ang biktima na makapag-secure ng free legal assistance or service. Pero napakahirap pong hanapin ang tinatawag na free legal assistance. Sabi din ng batas na ito, kailangan tulungan ang mga biktima ng panggagahasa, no? Sa pag-iimbestiga para mapabilis ang pag-aaresto ng mga nanggagahasa. Pati na yung pag-file ng kaso sa korte, etc. Meron pang counseling, hindi lang para sa biktima, pati sa buong pamilya niya. Walang ganda palat ng batas na yan, attorney. But where is the structure to make these things happen? No, bakit wala tayong naririnig na mga crisis centers na may ganitong mga serbisyong binibigay sa mga biktima ng panggagahasa? Again, ang ganda ng substance ng batas, pero wala or kulang na kulang sa istruktura. Okay? And then we move to culture. Okay? Ano ba yung kultura na mamayani sa atin? Victim blaming. No? Lalo pa sa mga usapin ng sexual offenses. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Survivors are unjustly blamed and often held responsible for the crime committed against them. Sila na nga ang biktima, sila pa ang kailangang magpaliwanag kung bakit sila nagahasa. Very unfair. No? Anong result nun? Ang epekto niyan sa biktima is basically the victim will feel powerless. The victim will feel ashamed. The victim will feel guilty. Why did I allow it to happen? No? Ganun yung mararamdaman niya kasi yun ang pinararamdam ng mga taong nakapaligid sa kanya. Meron ding tinatawag tayong just world hypothesis. Ano ba ito? Ito yung paniniwala na ang mundo, the world is inherently fair and rational. Well, so if the world is inherently fair and rational, basically you get what you deserve. Okay? If you work hard, then you will get good things. So why did you suffer that? Why did you become a victim? Well, maybe it's bad karma. Or well, maybe unfortunate events happen to people because they lack virtue, no? They lack the competence. So it's basically akin to victim blaming, pero ang tinitingnan pa dito is may kulang sa iyo kasi kaya ka nasadlak sa ganyang kalagayan because basically kulang ka sa virtue or kulang ka siguro sa competence, no? Yan, bahagi ng kultura yan. At ano ba yung dominant narratives on sexuality? Alam natin yan. Males are sexual aggressors and females as sexual gatekeepers. That's also the reason why women victims are blamed. Yun din ang dahilan yan, no? So, it's a justification that men are basically socially aggressive and so it is, are sexually aggressive and so it is socially acceptable for men to take advances, no? And for women, on the other hand, dapat sila, kasi since gatekeeper sila, restraint is expected of them because it is not expected of men. No? Napaka-unfair. Okay. So, that's why, narinig po natin yung palagi nating naririnig yung, oh, she asked for it, kaya siya na-rape. Rape is a deviant event. What does it mean? Basically, it doesn't happen all the time. So, kumbaga parang nabubulag-bulagan tayo na ano lang naman yan, it's an isolated incident. And then, oh, it wasn't really rape. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Baka naman ginusto niya, no? Consensual yan eh. Type naman niya yan eh. So, ito yung mga kulturang unfortunately ay namamayani sa atin, kaya yung biktima palagi ang nasisisi. So, basically, yan yung tungkol sa pag-analyze ng batas using the substance, structure, culture framework. Skip natin tong part na ito dahil alam nyo naman yan, no? So, I'm going to move to Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. Okay pa tayo, may time pa tayo. Anti-Sexual Harassment Act basically was passed in 1995. So this is an old law. It's called RA 7877. The definition of sexual harassment in this law is basically you demand, you request, you require sexual favor. At manotice nyo yung arrow pababa because under the law, it can only be committed by the superior against the subordinate. And let me just clarify that when I'm defining sexual harassment like this, I am talking about the crime of sexual harassment. So let me clarify that a bit further, no? Yung sexual harassment kasi, may tatlong aspeto yan, no? Yung mamaya na ituturo sa inyo tungkol sa ng taga-OWASH or representative ng OWASH ay more on the, or basically the administrative aspect of sexual harassment. Sa tatlong aspeto yan, may criminal aspect, ito yung pag-uusapan natin, meaning the crime of sexual harassment na pinafile sa Office of the Prosecutor. Ito yung gusto mong makulong yung taong nangharas sa iyo. Okay? Number 2 is yung administrative complaint for sexual harassment. At ito yung mamayang ituturo na yun na nga, ang parusa dyan usually ay yung trabaho ng isang tao or yung pagiging, yung status niya na pagiging estudyante. Pwede siyang magkaroon ng administrative case. Number 3 ay yung civil aspect ng sexual harassment. So anong penalty niyan? Basically, we're talking of damages. So monetary damages. So when I say definition of sexual harassment like this, where moral authority, ascendancy, or influence is required, we're talking of the criminal aspect of sexual harassment. So ganito yung itsura niyan, no? Sexual favor committed by a superior against the subordinate. At nasa tatlong environments lang yan: work, education, and training. So, yung 7877, hindi siya po pwedeng lumabas dito sa tatlong environments na ito. Okay? So, nag-a-apply lang siya between people who are working together, who are training together, or who are studying in the same place. Otherwise, kung wala itong environments na ito, hahanap ka ng ibang batas na maaaring gamitin. And if you're talking of sexual harassment pa rin, then you can probably look at Safe Spaces Act that I will discuss in a bit. Okay? So in the context of education, it is committed by the teacher again or the professor against the student. In the context of training, by the instructor against the student or trainee. And in the context of employment, by the boss, manager, superior against employee. So basically, to end itong sexual harassment part na ito, I just want to explain that there are two types of sexual harassment. At makikita mo rin yan sa definition ng batas. Ito yung quid pro quo, or basically you get something in return of something. And hostile environment sexual harassment. Nasa definition yan, ano ibig sabihin ng quid pro quo? Basically, you demand something in exchange of promotion, pag sa work, sexual favor in exchange of a passing grade, kung sa environment ng education, kung sa training naman is, I'm going to let you compete for this particular sport, even if you're not the best at it, no? Because I'm asking you something, and that is a sexual favor in exchange of that opportunity to compete, no? So even if that is accepted, iyan pa rin ang sexual harassment. So basically, ito yung mas malala. Lahat naman malala, pero kumbaga tahasan ito na sexual harassment, no? Yung hostile environment is basically, it makes the environment hostile, intimidating. Like pwedeng walang specific na demand or specific na kapalit na inoffer. Pero for example, if your boss asks you out and hindi mo pinagbigyan, and the next day, parang iniba na niya yung work assignment mo, etc., without saying anything or without making it very obvious to you, without verbalizing it, the environment becomes hostile or intimidating. So, yan yung another kind of sexual harassment. So, ang mga examples nito, lampasan ko na siguro ito dahil i-discuss naman yan mamaya, no? Ito yung may mga grave offenses kasi na ganyan sa CSE rules. Yan, no? That basically results to dismissal. There's also less grave and light offenses. Yan yung mga examples, makikita nyo sa screen, no? And kahit light yan, take note. Sa first offense mo, you get a reprimand, but on your third offense, you get a dismissal. So you can still lose your job because of sexual harassment. Okay, so ito yung mga forms. I think that will be discussed later. Then siguro, we can move to Safe Spaces Act, no? Kasi this is a relatively new law. Safe Spaces Act, or RA 11313. This was passed in 2019. Okay, so naalala niyo ba yung incident sa Cubao, yung kay Gretchen Diaz? Okay, I'll tell you a bit of a story about it kasi very relevant siya dito sa ating topic ngayon, no? Itong sexual harassment. Lately ko lang din mas naungkat kung ano nangyari sa kanya. So basically, siya yung trans who wanted to use a female comfort room. So sinita siya nung naglilinis dahil nga siguro nakita niya na hindi siya biologically female, that she's a trans. And to make it fast lang, yung kwento is, alam niyo ba na si Gretchen pala ay nadala sa presinto. Okay? Bakit siya nadala sa presinto? Basically, dahil kinasuhan pala siya ng unjust vexation. Okay? Alam niyo kung anong ibig sabihin ng unjust vexation sa Revised Penal Code? Yung unjust vexation sa Revised Penal Code basically is you're causing distress sa isang tao na hindi siya nagpo-fall sa ibang criminal offenses. Yung taong nakakasalamuha mo, you're causing nagko-cause ng emotional distress sa isang tao. So, napaisip tuloy ako, the mere fact pala na si Gretchen Diaz ay trans caused distress doon sa taong sumita sa kanya. And that's the reason why she was even hauled to the police station. Na-handcuff siya at dinala siya sa presinto. So, ang malungkot sa kwentong ito is, nung time na nangyari ito, basically, ay effective na itong Safe Spaces Act. And if you go back to the news, basically, nagsalita ang mayor ng Quezon City, si Joy Belmonte, na nagulat siya na nangyari ang insidenteng ito sa Quezon City where there is an ordinance, a catcalling ordinance, which basically mandates commercial establishments to endeavor to provide gender-neutral comfort rooms. So, nakakalungkot pala talaga yung kwento niya dahil makikita na napaka babaw or halos walang kaalaman. Very ignorant, basically, yung mga tao nakapaligid kay Gretchen Diaz ng araw na yon, no? Dahil siya pa yung nakasuhan when it was her right to basically make use of that comfort room. Maraming usapin dito, parang, baka naman, attorney, syempre, yung mga babae talaga na gumagamit ng CR na yon, may mga rights din silang na-violate dahil baka ayaw din naman nilang may makasabay na ganun, no? Sa comfort room. It should not happen actually if we take to heart kung ano yung sinasabi ng Safe Spaces Act. So, maganda yung title ng batas kasi safe spaces but safe from what? So basically, safe from gender-based sexual harassment. At kung matatandaan nyo yung kaninang illustration doon sa 7877, yung anti-sexual harassment, eto lang siya, yung triangle na yan lang, work, training, education. Pagdating sa Safe Spaces Act, in-expand niya yung protection. Sinama yung public spaces, pati yung internet or the cyberspace, and also including public utility vehicles, and is specifically addressing gender-based sexual harassment. So, sa ilalim ng batas na ito, basically, ang definition ng public space ay, the public spaces that traditionally we know of, like parks, okay? Yung mga parke natin at palaruan, public playgrounds, public spaces sila. Well, basically, because that's owned by the public or the government, no? Public buildings included. Attorney, what about private spaces or private establishments that are open to the public? For example, malls, okay? Resorts, cinemas, clubhouses or clubs. That's owned by the private sector or private entities, in this law, are they also considered public spaces? Yes. So ang definition ng public space dito sa batas na ito ay kasama yung privately owned establishments that are open to the public. At yung PUV specifically ay kasama na, and take note na hindi na limited ito doon sa superior committing sexual harassment against the subordinate. So yung arrow niya ay both ways na. It can also be committed by the subordinate against the superior. Okay, so meron ng peer sexual harassment, gender-based sexual harassment. So the protection is enhanced and the safe spaces are expanded. So ito yung gender-based sexual harassment, mga illustrations, ano? So makikita natin sa mga susunod, like ito yung outline, pinaka-outline ng batas na ito. Meron siyang specific na article na pinag-uusapan yung gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. So kung babalikan natin, ito yon, no? Insidente sa kalye, tapos ito rin, okay? Yan yung ina-address ng Article 1. So Article 2 moves to online sexual harassment. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na pati yung cyberspace ay kasama. Article 3 talks about qualified gender-based streets and public spaces and online sexual harassment. Anong ibig sabihin ng qualified? Mas mataas po ang parusa. No? Article 4, in a way, amends. But I think maybe the word amend is wrong kasi hindi naman siya, it doesn't basically overrule or amend nga, no? It doesn't have any effect on RA 7877, yung batas kaninang tiningnan natin. It basically prescribes a totally different crime kasi sabi sa batas na ito, this law can coexist with other laws, no? So meron siyang prescribe ngayon na crime ng gender-based sexual harassment that can be committed by the subordinate against the superior. Kung gagamitin natin yung 7877, by the superior against the subordinate lang. Sa Article 5 naman, talks about gender-based sexual harassment in educational and training institutions. So let's take a look at each of these articles. No? Ito yung definition niya ng gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. So kanina, yung sa 7877, I don't know if I was able to elaborate na even if it was accepted, no, yung favor, even if it was accepted, guilty pa rin ng sexual harassment doon sa 7877 if it was committed by the superior against a subordinate. Dito sa Safe Spaces Act, mayroon siyang definition na it has to be unwanted and uninvited sexual actions or remarks. Okay? Let's say, ang example niyan is kung may mga nakatambay sa kalsada na mga lalaki, for example, may dumaan na babae, at may nagsabi na, uy, ang ganda mo naman today, no? Sabi ng lalaki, for example. Tapos yung babae, sabi niya, uy, thank you, ang ganon. Attorney, is that gender-based sexual harassment under this article, Section 4 ng R877, 11313? It would seem that it is not, no? Kasi na-appreciate niya, so it wasn't basically exactly unwanted. Okay? Pero kung, kasi ang perspective ng batas na ito ay nasa perspective ng biktima. Pero kung hindi sila magkakilala, tapos yung binigyan ng seemingly comment na iyon, felt unsafe because of what they basically told her, pwede siyang maging gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. The qualification being, it should be unwanted and uninvited sexual action or remark. Okay? So, ito yung mga example niya. Okay? Catcalling. Okay? Wolf whistling. Unwanted invitations. Misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs. persisted uninvited comments or gestures on a person's appearance. Yun yung kanina, no? Relentless requests for personal details, statement of sexual comments and suggestions, public masturbation or flashing of private parts, groping or any advances, whether verbal or physical. These things, if committed in public, pasok na pasok siya dito sa Safe Spaces Act. Okay? Yan. So, moving to gender-based online sexual harassment. Basically, ang kaibahan lang nito is now you're using the ICT or Information Communications Technology in doing all those things na nabanggit din kanina, no? In many ways, you can still, for example, catcall someone, not the exact catcalling na alam natin, but you can do it using the ICT or Information Communication Technology. You can also be guilty of unwanted invitations over several social media platforms. For example, you can also throw homophobic slurs using the internet, etc. These things, if done using the ICT, then it becomes a gender-based online sexual harassment. May mga examples siya. Ito yung specific examples niya on top of what was already mentioned. Sorry. One basically is unwanted, so the same, no? But take note of this qualification, whether publicly or through direct and private messages. So hindi defense yung sasabihin mo na hindi po naman ako nag-comment doon sa kanyang public comment section. What I basically just did was sent him or her direct or private messages. Still, that is included. No? Invasion of victims' privacy through cyber stalking and incessant messaging. So take note, no? Kung mahilig kayong mag-message na may sexual content or sexual innuendos, or may content, may photo na, let's say, showing someone's private part, you have to be very careful, no? Kahit pa iniisip mo na joke lang yun sa'yo. Because like I said, ang batas nito ay galing sa perspective ng victim. Uploading and sharing without the consent of the victim of any form of media that contains photos, voice, or video with sexual content. Any unauthorized recording and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online. So, mahilig tayo ng ganito, no? You record someone, let's say, office mate mo na nakikipagkwentuhan, for example, sa boyfriend niya, no? Tapos in-upload mo online, at pwede siyang maging violation ng batas na ito. Impersonating identities of victims online, posting. Although itong impersonating identities of victims online, no, medyo off siya in a sense na para siyang generally cybercrime and not specifically gender-based sexual harassment. Siguro I would say na ang tinutukoy ditong impersonating identity, for example, is if you, by doing that, also attack the person's soji, or yung kanyang, let's say, yung kanyang gender, no? Pwedeng maging sexual harassment siya sa ilalim ng batas na ito. Posting of lies about victims to harm their reputation, filing false abuse reports to online platforms to silence victims, kasama rin. And, you know, you will understand because the essence of the law is to promote safe spaces online. Kaya, these are the things basically that cause us stress, no? Someone directly messaging you without your invitation, no? At kung ano-ano pang sinasabi sa'yo, someone stealing your sexy picture and posting it online. So, basically, ito ang mga bagay na, kumbaga, at marami pang iba that can cause you so much stress online. Okay, so, itong sa workplace naman, no, like I said, nabanggit ko na rin kanina yan, na sa ngayon, gender-based sexual harassment may be committed between peers. Okay, So, kasama yung peer-to-peer sexual harassment. Okay? Ganun din actually yung definition niya halos nasa 7877 except itong bagong dinagdag na ito. Okay? Ang isang mahalagang tandaan sa educational and training institutions ay itong provision na ito na nagsasabi na even if an individual does not file a complaint or does not request that the school take any action on behalf of a student or faculty member, and school authorities have knowledge or reasonably know about a possible or impending act of gender-based sexual harassment or sexual violence, the school should promptly investigate. So basically, may duty sa ilalim ng batas na ito ang pamunuan ng isang educational institution to promptly investigate sexual harassment even without a complaint pa, if it's common knowledge already, no? Or if someone brought it to the attention of the administration. Hindi po pwedeng maghugas kamay, in other words, ang administration. Okay, so the law talks about duties of employer under this law, which are the following: to disseminate or post RA 11313 to basically have preventive measures, and the preventive measures could be seminars like what we are doing now, and to also, kagaya ng sa 7877, to have a committee on decorum and investigation, and a code of conduct that basically includes, no, gender-based sexual harassment. So kumbaga yung mga employers ngayon, dapat i-revise yung kanilang handbook. At sasabihin na doon sa handbook nila na bawal ang gender-based sexual harassment. Of course, the employees also have duties, and the foremost of which would be to refrain from committing gender-based sexual harassment, to discourage the conduct of gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace, to provide emotional or social support to co-worker victims of gender-based sexual harassment, and to report gender-based sexual harassment witnessed in the workplace. So basically, I would surmise that the handbook that will be revised by the employers should include these things as well, no? Na yung mga empleyado na nakapag-witness ng gender-based sexual harassment will also be, in a way, obligated to report the same, no? Hindi po pwedeng manahimik siya and say, wala naman talaga akong nakita. So, kailangan i-consider itong duties ng mga employers and also ng employers sa pag-revise ng handbook para mas maiwasan yung GBSH or gender-based sexual harassment in the workplace. All right, so I think I'm down to my last 2 slides for this group, 2 or 3 slides for this group. And I'm looking at the time para meron tayong Q&A portion pa. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na qualified yung crime or mas mataas ang parusa kapag ang sexual harassment ay kinumit or ang perpetrator basically ay driver, for example, ng Grab, no? At ang kanyang biktima ay yung kanyang pasahero. Okay? So I think that is understandable kasi basically when you avail of that kind of facility, which is a public utility, basically, umaasa ka na yung driver ay walang gagawin sa iyong masama. That you will be safe inside his car, basically. So the penalty for the driver is higher than, say, penalty for a person who commits it in the street, no? Number 2, if the offended party is a minor, senior citizen, or a person with disability, or a breastfeeding mother nursing her child, the crime is also, the penalty rather is higher because the crime is qualified. Number 3, if the offended party is diagnosed with a mental health problem tending to impair consent. Of course, that's understandable. If the perpetrator is a PNP, AFP member, and the act was perpetrated while in uniform. You remember yung mga reported incidents of harassment committed against members of the LGBT community during the quarantine, ano? Pinagbilad sila sa araw, and reportedly it was committed by members of the PNP and AFP. So basically, yung kanilang penalty doon ay mas mataas kesa kung ang nag-commit nun, for example, ay kasabay lang nilang umuwi, no? Or if you also remember the incident committed against the Pride 20, yung mga LGBT na umattend nag-hold ng Pride March last June, no? At ang perpetrators doon basically ay members of the PNP. So also, and I don't know if you were able to monitor it, ang counter-charge, isa sa mga counter-charges na sinampa ng Pride 20 laban sa kanila ay qualified gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. Okay, so lastly, if the act or the sexual harassment takes place in the premises of a government agency offering frontline services to the public and the perpetrator is a government employee. Let's say if wala naman sana, but if, for example, a sexual harassment occurs nowadays in a hospital, no, in a COVID devoted facility committed by, let's say, the hospital administrator against a nurse or a patient. So that is also qualified. Or if it takes place in the DSWD, okay, so qualified din ang parusa sa kanya. Okay? Merong mga kakaibang features ang batas na ito. Take note of Section 27, which is restraining order. Isa ito sa mga, ang alam lang natin na merong restraining order na kasama in the form of protection order. Basically, ay yung RA 9262, no? Merong protection order doon. At ito rin, meron siyang similar protection order, which is a stay-away order before a decision is made. So kung may pending na kaso for gender-based sexual harassment, maaring humingi yung biktima sa korte ng stay-away order laban doon sa perpetrator. So let's say if they work in the same company, so pwede siyang magpa-detail sa ibang division, or pwedeng yung perpetrator ay sabihan na hindi muna po pwedeng lumapit sa kanya while the case is being heard, no? It also provides that LGUs may pass ordinances that impose heavier penalties. Medyo kakaiba itong batas na ito because basically ang nagsiset ng penalties pati elements ay yung national law, which is this one, Republic Act. Pero ito specifically binigyan ng permit yung LGUs na magpasa sila ng ordinances na mag-i-impose ng mas mataas pang parusa kesa sa mga parusa na nakasulat sa batas na ito. And there's also the exemption part, kasi di ba yung breastfeeding minsan po pwedeng sabihin nila, oh that is basically pwedeng gawa ng kwento at sabihin na yan ay gender-based sexual harassment being committed in the public. But specifically sabi ng batas na ito, acts that are legitimate expressions of indigenous culture and tradition, as well as breastfeeding in public, shall not be penalized. And just to be clear, para walang pilosopo na mag-access ng batas na ito at kasuhan yung nag-express ng kanilang kultura and tradition. Okay? And lastly, take note that if you are a government employee, and a criminal case for gender-based sexual harassment may be filed against you without prejudice to you facing administrative sanctions. So parang kagaya ito ng RA 7877 din.